Driftless Water Defenders. I'm Jim LaRue. I'm attorney for the board of directors, and I'll be speaking to some legal themes at the far end of the program, but for now I wanted to plant a few seeds, if you will. One is you're sharing your time on what is the longest day of the year, yet your time is valuable. And if you look at the Latin roots of the word solstice, in the ancient languages, it was their observation that it was the day that the sun stood still. Now, we interpret the same event slightly differently, but I thought it might be a way to frame our proceedings today, to think of it as being a day when we think of looking backwards and forwards. We come here with a year of accomplishment, thanks to the strong support of the members, but the day also falls after 5 months of what I think could reasonably be described as the most disastrous period of time in modern history in terms of environmental laws and practices. That also is a part of what we are in the midst of. As a thought experiment, and I'll come back to this later, I'd like you to conjecture for a moment that in this world of cameras, where our photos are taken sometimes when we know it, sometimes when we don't, imagine, if you will, that some period of time from now, maybe a period of time where you are not around to interpret a photograph, but someone has taken a photograph of you, maybe people at your table, maybe in a way that you're not aware of it. You're looking around, maybe you're sneaking a look at your cell phone and doing a little email, who knows. But the picture shows up, and maybe not interpreted by someone who would know you, but by strangers, maybe someone doing some historical work. And if at that moment, that person might conjecture, and here I'm having you sort of fill in the blanks in this thought experiment, how was it that in this moment of time, when there's so much environmental degradation going on a beautiful, if hot day, on the summer solstice, you found, or someone's identifying you in the photograph as having come to share some of your day with others? What series of events, what kinds of thoughts would have caused you as a person in the photograph to have made this enough of a priority that here you are? And then the other side of the question, like the solstice, looking forward and looking back, what would that interpreter photograph, if they looked to find out who you were, what might they find about you that you did after this day? What kinds of accomplishments, big or small? How did you live your life? Give those thoughts some consideration as we proceed through the day, and I'm going to come back at the end with what I've called for the title of my talk, a parable. A parable. You see, when movements, and I think we're in the middle of the beginning phase of an important social movement, a civil rights movement, when these movements start, they don't necessarily have common vocabularies. They create a language that binds them. The successful movements have adopted music to cause them into a collective agreement with each other in what they share in terms of singing, art, and that kind of thing. Well, this is where we are, at the beginning phase of what I believe is a new civil rights movement. In Iowa, we're expressing it as water because we're literally killing ourselves with the quality of our water. Other parts of the country, it might be a broader, a different issue. But I believe we are on the cusp of a new civil rights movement focused on fundamental rights that we have to a clean environment and clean water. Well, in order to move into our program, I wanted to describe to you some facts about our first speaker, who is also the president of the group, Chris Jones. Chris has been on the forefront of thinking about clean water for some period of time. He and I, about a year ago, put together an essay to support what is a proposal made by us to have a new constitutional amendment to the Iowa Bill of Civil Rights, which would define as a fundamental right and require the courts to protect any damage to our right to access clean water. We've described it as a fundamental right because it is one that even preceded us in the old days in the law, English common law, coming over the United States. They used to call these natural rights, rights that preceded formal law, that were so elemental, so apparent to everyone, that courts need not even whisper their names in order to have it be effective and protected. Now, what we don't call not natural rights anymore, but we call fundamental rights, we're in a more formal way. We put them in constitutions, and if they were omitted there for one reason or another, we then also put them informally in the Constitution. We think that our Iowa law formally ought to recognize something that settlers here found to be true, and particularly this part of the state, the first area settled by settlers. Clean water in astonishing quality and abundance. Clean air as well. It preceded us. Now it's time for us to recapture it and say access to clean water is a fundamental right. Well, the language that we've put in to our proposed constitutional amendment is intended to do that. And Chris Jones, a co-author of that, has been probably the most visible proponent of the values that are in that declaration of fundamental rights. Chris has sometimes fought a lonely battle. He has been a truth teller about the quality of our water now for decades. And when truth has clashed against interests who benefit by something other than the clearest water we can possibly produce for ourselves, those who have political power, Chris has felt the brunt of that in ways that few Iowans have. When Martin Luther King Jr. was starting out in his quest for civil rights, he used to talk about the concerns that people would sometimes call someone telling the truth that they were maladjusted. Maladjusted. Well, King said, let me be called maladjusted, because I don't want to be adjusted to the cruelties of this world. But when you're labeled by someone else as maladjusted, it can be a difficult burden to carry. And think how many times that Chris Jones has been labeled one way or the other simply for telling the truth. Well, we are lucky that Chris Jones is the president of our group. In the past few weeks, he's been as many places as you can imagine in response to the nitrate water crisis, telling the truth. And we certainly appreciate that. So, Chris's talk today is, can the driftless area survive big meat and big dairy? I present to you the president of DWD, Chris Jones.
All right, thanks, Jim. The word we use in science is maladaptive. Maladaptive. So that's what I've been accused of being, is maladaptive to my role here. And I would just tell you, Jim and other people give me much more moral authority than I deserve on this. I will say I'm able to string a few sentences together, and so people like that, at least some people like that. And so I think just because of that, I get more credit for being a moral authority on this issue than I deserve, and so I just want to lead you with that. I put these slides together about a month ago because I'm doing a program on Tuesday in St. Charles, Minnesota, and the Winona County Partnership for Clean Water, I think is the name of the group, invited me, and I knew we were having this meeting. And so I thought both of these meetings I could use the same slides, right? Two birds, one stone. And then this nitrate thing blew up, and so I kind of regret not putting together some slides about the nitrate issue in Des Moines and also Cedar Rapids, but I would like to say a few words about that. You have probably heard Des Moines has restricted lawn irrigation because they can't treat enough water for nitrate removal. And this has really, unfortunately, been framed as sort of an aesthetic issue for people in Des Moines, and the authorities there running what's now called the Central Iowa Water Works, I think largely bear the responsibility for that. And it's not being portrayed as the public health crisis that it is. And so, you know, what we really have in Des Moines is what we call a pollution-induced scarcity of water. So there's plenty of water there, we just can't use it the way we want because it's too polluted. And this is really a serious deal. And so my partner's son, he works in the Twin Cities for the St. Paul Regional Water Services, and he called her this morning and said, wow, this is such big news up here. Everybody here realizes how terrible this is. And I think because of this repression of speech on these issues in Iowa, we have an unawareness of how serious this is. And, you know, Des Moines, the drinking water coming out of people's taps, it's 9 milligrams per liter, thereabouts. It's below the EPA standard. There's this idea that that's safe, right? And we even hear the authorities in Des Moines saying the water is safe. Well, you know, what's safe? We have this mountain of evidence that associates nitrate in water above 3 milligram per liter with various cancers and other negative human health consequences. So would we call that water safe? I don't know. It's below the standard. The standard has been under review since 2010. The main reason we don't have a new standard from EPA is because the ag lobby, right? They know a new standard, a lower nitrate standard, would be a big, big deal. What you don't hear about is Cedar Rapids also has a big problem. And the water in Cedar Rapids today coming out of the taps is also about 9 milligrams per liter. And Iowa City, it's above 8 milligrams per liter. And we don't hear about these things. And that is deliberate, right? It's deliberate that we do not hear about these things and that we're not informed of these issues in our drinking water. And that's really needs to change, and I think it is going to change. I feel this latest issue in Des Moines really maybe has some legs, and that maybe it will affect some change on how these issues are discussed in Iowa. So anyway, I just wanted to talk briefly about the drinking water issue in Des Moines because it is such big news right now. And I'll go on to my slides here, and you probably know I wrote the book, The Swine Republic. I have a Substack by the same name. If you're interested in that, then I'd encourage you to go there and check that out. I like to talk about the geology of this area whenever I do presentations. I think it's important for people to understand because the geological past, especially the past of glaciation, affects how water quality is in our state. And so Iowa has had intrusions of glaciers 7 times, we think, but there's been 3 main events. The pre-Illinoisan event ended 500,000 years ago, covered basically all of Iowa. And so what we call the driftless here, it's not really driftless. There was glaciers here, although I'm not sure the geologists really have it right completely, because some of the stuff to me looks unglaciated, and especially this, the upper Iowa River Valley as you go down towards New Albin, and I think these areas just to the northwest of Dubuque really look to me like they have not been glaciated, and some other places, but we know on the ridge tops here there is glacial drift. The second period of glaciation was the Illinoisan period, and then the last The Illinoisans not showing up, I don't know why. The third one was the Wisconsin Glacier, and that's the one we talk about the most in Iowa because that tongue of ice came down into north central Iowa, and that's where we have much of our tiled landscape. That's where a lot of the nitrate issue comes from. And there we have the driftless region, and so this is kind of the latest interpretation of the geologists. The Wisconsin and Illinois portions are the ones that are only truly driftless in the geologist's opinion. Then we call this other landscape driftless-like. And a lot of this, we believe, is shaped mainly because of its proximity to the Mississippi River, the Iowa and Minnesota portions. And so you can see those dots there on the map on the right. We've known this for quite a while, going back to the 60s. Glacial drift has been found where those dots are on the map, and we do know that there are some glacial erratic boulders in the Iowa portion of the driftless area also. And so prior to settlement, we all know this is basically what Iowa looked like. Wetland, prairie, and then the oak savanna, and of course that stuff's all gone, right? And converted to crops, and so we have our different land surfaces here across Iowa. Most of the wetlands were in the area north of I-80. Southern Iowa would have been tall grass prairie and the oak savanna. And as you drive across Iowa, you can see these changes in the landscape if you know what you're looking for. To the average observer, they don't see a change because there's only two species out there, right? Corn and soybean, and so everything looks uniform to average people, but if you know what you're looking for, you can tell when you cross from one landform to another. And so there's the area of land each landform comprises in the state of Iowa. Up here, the driftless or Paleozoic plateau, the more technical correct term, is 4.6% of the land in Iowa. The other thing here about Iowa that's really unique is so much of our land is in private hands, okay? And so we're trying to do a water quality improvement projects, and we almost always have to do it on private land, and that means we need the permission of the landowner because we don't have laws that regulate these environmental outcomes. Prior to settlement, most of our streams here in Iowa would have been these wide, shallow systems spilled out into the floodplain very regularly. We would add the clean water species of smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, general species of channel catfish. We would add sands and gravels in the river bottom, but we modified our streams, right? And so we straightened a lot of them. Not so much in northeast Iowa, but the rest of Iowa. And that caused them to cut downward, erode downward, and now we have the pollution-tolerant species, the carp and bullhead. We still have the general species, the channel cat. And then we have annual plants on the stream banks instead of perennial plants. And so when we drive across the countryside, if you didn't know any better and you looked at these streams way down in these canyons, you'd think that's the way they're supposed to look, right? Well, they're not. They shouldn't look that way. And so that's what we call landscape bias. And so people think what they see is the natural condition of things, and it isn't. And so they don't realize what these streams could or should look like. And that's an issue in trying to drive change. Up here in northeast Iowa, we have good groundwater, very usable groundwater, because these bedrock aquifers are close to the surface. Right, and so the Prairie du Chien aquifer, the Jordan, the Mount Simon, as we travel from northeast to southwest, they get deeper and deeper and deeper. Up here they're shallow, and so that means the water is very usable and soft and aesthetically good, but it also means it's more vulnerable to contamination from the surface. And so this is what the Prairie du Chien aquifer would look at like. We see the bedrock exposed in areas around this part of the state. This is Alameda County. This was all deposited 500 million years ago. And we see more. This is the upper Iowa River Valley. And And so this exposed bedrock all has really good groundwater for use. And so why do things look different up here even though we didn't have the glaciers? Well, as I said, it's because of its proximity to the Mississippi River. We look at the divide between the Upper Iowa River and the Wapsie. That's at 1,267 feet. The Upper Iowa River is much closer, the source of the Upper Iowa River is much closer to the Mississippi than is the Wapsie. So the Upper Iowa, the slope is 4.1 feet per mile. The Wapsie is only 2.3 feet per mile as it goes to the Mississippi. And so this increased energy from the slope has caused this scouring of the river valleys and exposed this bedrock like we see in the Upper Iowa. And so this happened over many, many millions of years, as I said. And so that's why this area looks like the Wisconsin portion. It's not because there weren't glaciers, it's because of its proximity to the Mississippi. So let's talk about water quality a little bit. We know the driftless area, and I'm going to use the driftless area colloquially here for all 4 of the states in the Paleozoic plateau. We know the driftless area is very vulnerable to nitrate loss from our farming systems. And so this isn't working the way it was supposed to on my computer. So what this shows is that nitrate loss from the Upper Iowa and the Turkey and the Yellow River is extraordinarily high. It's not working on the slide, and so I can't, you'll just have to take my word for it. We know the same is true in Minnesota and the karst area, very vulnerable to nitrate loss. And so we know that this nitrate loss, the increase over time, is not so much connected to fertilization, but in changes to our cropping systems. Okay? And so we know in this area, northeast Iowa, southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, historically these were diverse farms, right? A lot of small dairy farms that were growing forage crops for their cattle. Yes, there was corn here, but there weren't many soybeans until the 1960s. And when we see soybeans come in, then we see these other crops go out. And so alfalfa and oats would have been very commonly grown in this area, and now they're not. And so this is southeast Minnesota, as I said. Something similar would be the case for Iowa and Wisconsin. And so this loss of diversity on our farms is what's causing this nitrate loss, primarily. So, nature likes diversity. We only have 2 species out there on the landscape. We're not going to get the environmental outcomes that we want when we only have 2 species on the landscape. And so you can see here, boy, I'm having trouble, how the oats and alfalfa went by the wayside when soybeans came in. The other thing is, as we concentrated our cattle on fewer and fewer farms, then farmers that were growing forage crops, well, they didn't have anything to do with them, right? And so if you're going to grow alfalfa, you got to have something that can eat it. Or you need to have a neighbor that has something that can eat it. And so as cattle were concentrated on fewer and fewer farms, that made it less reasonable for farmers to grow alfalfa and these forage crops. And so I had a farmer tell me in Wisconsin, once the cattle go out, the soybeans come in. Well, that's when we start having our nitrate issues. The other thing about soybeans is this use of commercial fertilizer went hand in hand with the emergence of soybeans. And so prior to soybeans, most of the nitrogen that we use for corn did not come from commercial fertilizer. It came from fixation, from legumes, and from manure. And so this graph here shows the amount of nitrogen used in Iowa per corn acre. Okay, that's in green. the number of acres in Iowa that are in soybeans, that is in black. And so we see that went in lockstep, right? And so the point I want to hammer home here is when we went to all cash crop all the time, that's when we got our nitrate problem. All right? It's not necessarily just the fertilization of corn. That being said, the application rate of nitrogen to corn is increasing. And so this is Minnesota, southeast Minnesota. We can see the green is the pounds of commercial nitrogen sold per corn acre. The brown is the nitrogen harvested in the grain, and that includes the soybean. And so this is a budget I did for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And we can see here, I have there the commercial nitrogen applied, the nitrogen that farmers should take credit for from growth of soybeans, and so that's fixation. We have the commercial nitrogen there, and then we have the nitrogen removed in the corn and soy crops. And you can see there when we just include commercial fertilizer, there's a deficit, right? An average deficit of 42 million pounds per year in southeast Minnesota. But the livestock animals in southeast Minnesota excrete more than 100 million pounds of nitrogen per year. And so all of a sudden, that deficit of minus 42 million pounds per year becomes a surplus of nitrogen of 58 million pounds per year. And so this is an issue throughout the region and throughout the state of Iowa where we're not accounting for the nutrients from livestock, at least not adequately. And so when we have these livestock intense landscapes, we're seeing a large surplus of nutrient application, especially in these livestock intense landscapes. And so there we have in southeast Minnesota, the average surplus is more than 60 million pounds of nitrogen per year. Well, that doesn't just go into the Milky Way, right? It ends up somewhere. It ends up in our streams, in our lakes, in our air. And so we see our aquifers being contaminated in this part of the region. This is the nitrate risk there in Minnesota, in these counties, in the driftless portion, very high. And so that 60 million pounds of surplus up there, that can contaminate 700 billion gallons of water to greater than the 10 part per million standard. So 700 billion gallons of water. So, you know, a situation would be very similar here in Iowa. And so a lot of times we think about the driftless not being an area of intense production relative to the rest of the state. Well, the driftless is an intense area of livestock production. And so when we look at the counties in the driftless area of Iowa, you can see there the percentage of Iowa's area that each county comprises, the percentage of Iowa's hogs. And so the driftless counties have 8.1% of Iowa's area. They have 6.7% of the hogs, but we have 30% of the dairy cattle and 13% of the beef cattle. So relative to the rest of Iowa, the driftless area is indeed an intense area of cattle production, right? We don't have the hogs, but we do have a lot of cattle here. So what are the solutions here? What are the solutions that we need to do to clean up our water and get the environmental outcomes that we want? Well, we need to align the nitrogen inputs with that removed that's being removed in the crop. And so we know in Iowa, statewide, we're probably applying on the order of 30 to 40 pounds more nitrogen than what's being removed in the crop. Okay? We need a way to align the inputs with what's being harvested in the crop. Yes, sir.
When you say removed in the crop, that is what the crop utilizes, the rest.
So that's in the grain. That's what's removed in the grain. And so there's some of that nitrogen that's still in the crop residue, but that stays on the field in most cases. Sometimes it's harvested, usually not. So if it stays on the field, it should carry over to the following year, right? And so these are the sorts of calculations we need to be making to better align the inputs with what's being removed in the grain. Another thing we need to do is we need incentives to transition farmers to integrated, diversified crop and livestock systems. And so we spend all this money for these Band-Aids and diapers across the Corn Belt and here in Iowa to try to patch up this corn and soybean system. And so one thing we hear about in Iowa a lot are the bioreactors, right? Or the saturated buffers or constructed wetlands that are all placed at the edge of the field to capture the loss from the system, right? And so we're not dealing with the pollution in the field. We're asking the taxpayer to essentially pay for a treatment plant, right? So they can continue doing what they have been doing all along. Well, is that the best solution? Is that the best use of taxpayer money? Wouldn't we be better off to incentivize farmers to get the systems that produce in a more environmentally sustainable way, right? We need these diversified systems to produce the environmental outcomes that we want. Let's use our taxpayer dollars to get that instead of paying for these Band-Aids on the corn and soy system. We need to aggressively limit and monitor driftless livestock populations based on water quality and other environmental objectives. So we can look at a watershed. We can look at a watershed and we can quantify how many livestock animals that watershed can endure and still have good water quality. We can do that. We know how to do that. But that's not the way the permitting process in Iowa works, right? If you want a CAFO, you go through the master matrix process, you go through the checklist, the county supervisors approve it, you get the construction permit. There's no recognition about how many animals are already in that watershed, okay? This is how we should be doing livestock siting in Iowa. We should say, okay, there's already 200,000 hogs and 20,000 cattle and however many chickens in this watershed. This is how many more animals that watershed can accommodate and still produce adequate water quality. We need to aggressively regulate the manure application, therefore the testing, timing, soil temperature, etc. The way DNR regulates what we have is just pathetic, okay? So we have about 8,000 CAFOs in Iowa that required a construction permit, which means they required a manure management plan. We have maybe 50 to 100 people working for DNR that are charged with regulating the CAFO system. Well, 8,000 CAFOs, there's probably 2 to 3 manure management plans per CAFO. So what's that? Upwards of 20,000 manure management plans. You have 50 to 100 people working for DNR in charge of this. Well, do the math there, you know. Hardly ever is a DNR person ever going to take a look at one of these manure management plans. And so what we have now is we have regulation by fish kill, right? That's what we have. If there's a fish kill, then if somebody calls it in, has the courage to call it in, then DNR goes out and looks. Then those manure management plans come out of the filing cabinet. Then we start looking at other aspects of the permit, the construction permit, the pit size, all that. So we wait until something bad happens, right? And then we start to regulate. Well, that's not the way it should work. We should be regulating the system aggressively so these things don't happen in the first place. And so, yes, in a lot of these streams, the fish will come back, but we see these streams that get killed over and over and over again. You know, we lose species diversity over time. This is a long-term process. It might be 20, 30, even 50 years. And so the average person, you might have a fish kill on Dry Run Creek. Well, we take care of that, and 2 years later, most of the species are back, and as human beings, we go out and we see it, and we think, okay, well, it's better. Well, we don't see the long-term consequences of killing these streams over and over and over again. And so some of these streams, especially in western Iowa, have been killed so many times, and there's so much manure solids that have accumulated in the stream bottom that, nothing can live in them. And so, how do you get a fish kill even that anybody's going to notice? They've been killed so many times, this stuff won't even live in there. And so we really need to change the mindset here. We got to quit this regulation by fish kill, and we need to regulate the way any other industry is regulated. So let's talk about Bloody Run here for a minute. Most of you, I'm sure, have probably heard of this. The stream, 6 mile long stream, goes into the Mississippi there, just south of Marquette. Supreme Beef, the large cattle operation, has 12,000 cattle there. This is an ongoing story going back to 2017. Initially, there was going to be a manure digester there. That fell through. Some of the partners backed out, and DNR eventually permitted the operation as an industrial wastewater treatment facility. Kind of losing my train of thought here. In February of 24, the water permit, the water use permit was challenged by some people in this room, Steve Vasey and others. I don't know if Larry's here or not. And this was brought before an administrative law judge. I testified at the hearing as an expert witness. Supreme Beef had a water use permit to water the cattle. They applied for it when they opened the operation. Those water use permits last 5 years. It expired. They needed a renewal. The water use permit was challenged because in Iowa code it says that DNR must consider the environmental outcomes of the issuance of a water use permit. They've never done that. DNR has never done that. That was a case that was brought before the administrative law judge. Finally, in November of 2024, the judge sided with the plaintiffs, saying, yes, DNR should not have renewed the water use permit, and they should have considered the consequences of issuing the permit. And, after the water goes through the bodies of 12,000 cows, it's going to be polluted. It's got to, end up somewhere. This is going to affect the water quality in the Driftless area. The judge agreed. And so not long after that, the water use permit was sent back to DNR. The findings of an administrative law judge are not binding on DNR. DNR ignored it, went ahead and issued the water use permit renewal. But before the renewal was finalized, we challenged it. We submitted it. Driftless Water Defenders submitted a petition to DNR to challenge the renewal. We had a petition signing event in Decorah. Some of you might have been there. They ignored our petition, went ahead and issued the renewal, water use permit renewal. We're continuing to challenge that. And so that's one of the things the organization has done here in the last year. We've also challenged a manure digester in western Winnebago County, and so we have a dairy near Ridgeway that wants to expand from 800 cattle to about 10,000 cattle, and to do that, they're going to need a manure digester to help handle the manure. We know that these digesters do nothing to improve water quality. in the Greenberry area of Wisconsin. It's an area of a lot of adoption of the manure digesters. Water quality has continued to degrade there because the digesters do not reduce the nutrient content of the waste, okay? But it does enable the farmer to expand the herd, right? And so we expand the herd, but we don't reduce the nutrient content of the waste. Look, what's going to happen, right? Your water's going to be degraded further. So we're challenging the manure digester in western Winnebago County. And as you know, here's our mission: educate, advocate, and litigate. We want to do all three to try to improve water quality in this region. The one thing I didn't mention, oh, they're out of order here. We're also suing the Agristar plant in Postville. They've been exceeding the limits on their NPDES permit now for months and months and months. DNR won't do anything. They won't enforce the limits on the NPDES permit, and so we're suing for compliance on that. They discharge into the Yellow River. The Yellow River is our longest trout stream in Iowa. It's been impaired for quite some time now, and probably very likely connected to the discharge from the Agristar plant. And so that's our work, and we think we're making a difference. You know, we're trying to fight. We want to show people that we're willing to fight for clean water. We don't want to be like the people in Polk County that just kind of want this problem to go away. We want to give people hope, right? We want to give you hope, and we want to take some risks, and we want to engage, and we want you to feel empowered, all right? So many of the events that I do, people come up to me afterwards, and I'm not kidding you on this. They have tears in their eyes because they feel so powerless to affect change on this. They've seen things degrade throughout the course of their life, and they've seen the problem ignored by politicians and by other institutions in our state. And they want to know, what can I do, right? What can I do to affect change? Well, we're trying to give you that. We're trying to give you that outlet. You know, you can engage with us and be part of this group, and we can do some tangible things, you know, that will get noticed and demonstrate that we mean business, right? We mean business here. We want things to change. We want things to get better. We want the polluters to fear somebody, right? And so I'll just end with that.
Thank you, Chris. We're fortunate that someone of Chris's knowledge and stature and passion for the topics and issues that we care about is willing to serve as our president. We do take these other aspects of our mission, advocating, educating seriously, and some talks that follow today address some of those issues. On a political front, it has been my observation over time, perhaps you agree, perhaps you don't, is that it's frequently the case that politicians and those running for office are the last ones to acknowledge a problem, and they're pushed there by the people. And the more controversial the topic is, the less likely it is for someone running for office to take the charge, because they become more concerned about losing a vote than being willing to envisage winning a vote. It's my observation that this group's purpose is to create public momentum in the courts, in the dining halls, in neighborhoods, that make it easy for politicians to make the right decisions and not the other way around. Our next speaker will be Terry Mazzoni, who's treasurer of our group. But as a segue to introducing her, I want to acknowledge the efforts of people who have been important to this year of progress. We have a group of people who we've designated as our board of advisors. These are people who don't have to assume the burdens of being on a board, and it is burdensome use of time and exertion of efforts, but have wanted to play a role, and I just want to name them, and if not all of them could come, I know they had some conflicts, but if you hear your name called, if you wouldn't mind just standing so other people can see who you are. Our board of advisors are John Beard, Brian Bruning, David Cavagnaro, Ann Edgerton, Carl Homestead, Brigida Mead, Larry Stone, Gilby Strube, Steve Facey, Tim Wagner, and Bob Watson. And we thank each of them have been helpful in some way in the past year. Some of them have been a critical component of an important event. But for Carl Homestead, we would have had no concert this year, which was a wonderful success. Others who I named, John Beard, Steve Facey, will be important parts of the federal litigation that we filed against Agristar under the Federal Clean Water Act. And our group is the plaintiff. You as members are plaintiff. A part of that kind of litigation is that certain members of the group must prove standing, that they have a real concrete interest in the outcome of the action. And the way that the process usually works, we don't have to have 267 members come and testify, but some group will. And already we know that John Beard, for example, Steve Facey, will be going through, and that's a burden there. And so there are the board of advisors, there's others in the room as well, but I just wanted to give you an illustration of that kind of participation. Now finally, for our board members, there are 3 officers on the board. Chris, president, you just had his presentation. Terry, who's coming up. I don't want to forget Mary Dom, who is sitting here. She is our secretary and is very essential to our operation. So thanks to each of those people. Finally, before introducing Terry, I just would ask an open-ended question. Are there any people here who are elected officials at any level of office? Please stand and tell your name.
Kirsten Olson, Decorah City Council.
Thank you for coming. It will be a part of my message in the conclusion of our program that no level of service, no level of office is too small, too low to make an effective difference. 2 of our lawsuits that are pending out, and if we should prevail, I can't tell you, it's in front of the judges, they're making decisions. One against the Winneshiek County Board of Supervisors, one against the Winneshiek County Board of Adjustment. And I can tell you, those are the kinds of lawsuits that almost no one pays attention to. But if we should happen to prevail, the world's going to feel a little bit different, at least in the part of the world, and I consider myself to be one of those people very concerned about the spread of dairy, cow, manure digesters. Some of these battles are fought at the most minute level. Be given some thought. I told you before, I want you to think about how did you get here today? And how will the world look different 10 years from now, looking back? There might be someone here who's on the edge of thinking of running for some kind of office at some level. If you're one of those people close, I hope we can nudge you in the right direction. With those words having been said, I want to introduce Terry Mazzoni. It was easy, I think, for me to convince Terry to take this job on because we did not exist. And I could tell her, well, there's no money in the treasury. How could treasurer be a difficult job? Well, with your wonderful support by membership and the sponsors that we have, it's become a difficult job for anyone. And Terry's done it masterfully. And then you need to know that in addition to Carl, the reason that concert came off so well is because Terry carried the burden forward. And so she's had a very busy year, and it's been wonderful to work with her. I present your neighbor, Terry Mazzoni.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
first of all, as treasurer, I want to thank you all for your philanthropy. Whether you've given through your membership or as a donor or as a volunteer or a combination of the above, your generosity has been essential to our organization, and we appreciate it very much. DWD is committed for the long term because we know policy change and making positive environmental headway does not happen overnight. Excuse me, I have allergies. So.
Terry, can you move the mic a little?
Oh, so sorry, yeah.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
that might be better, yeah.
That's better.
Yeah.
I've been told that I talk fast, and sometimes my voice is also lower than I'm aware of. I was told that I would be speaking for 5 minutes, so I prepared for that, and then I saw on the agenda that I have a 15-minute slot, so I will be talking very slowly. Or I will try. Your continued encouragement and support, however that works for each of you, will continue to have an impact. Through your support, we've accomplished a lot in one short year. It's gone by so fast. As Jim said, we began with an empty bank account, and we gained revenues of almost $86,000, which I felt pretty good about. On the expense side, and there's a pie chart in the annual report that's out there if you wanted to look at that. We spent less than $20,000 on operating expenses, which is only 3%, which is, I think, a pretty good rate. And the biggest reason for that low overhead is that all of our work is performed by volunteers. The energy of volunteerism is that which drives us forward. Almost half of our revenues, 48%, went toward programming expenses, advocating and educating for clean water through our various educational and speaking events, locally, regionally, and throughout the state, such as meetings sponsored by the Harkin Institute in Des Moines. And we have expanded our presence throughout the state via the 48 Lakes Project. And that's an effort to awaken citizens to the loss of recreational use of our parks and lakes due to polluted waters. So your support through dollars and volunteering made our May fundraiser, the Greg Brown and Friends concert, a huge success. We sold out in less than 3 weeks. And the net from ticket sales came to $17,000. And additionally, we had about $10,000 come in through very generous sponsors that were wanting to support that. In January, the board hired a consultant, Keith Schneider, a former New York Times environmental writer who still has a special interest in Iowa water quality, to lead a strategic planning session with our executive board and our advisory board. And we spent a day together in January mapping out goals and strategies for the upcoming year. And I think everyone who attended would agree that it was very valuable time spent. And then the board decided to contract with Keith for a 6-month term so that he could help develop our website and our newsletters and help us with research fundraising strategies. The Highlandville School Clean Water event happened the week after the concert, and Brigitte Mead will speak about that in a bit. It was a wonderful day. It was cold, but it was still a really great day, featuring water quality speakers and discussions, hands-on water testing instruction in the schoolhouse, which was just a nice place along the stream there for such an event. And DWD plans to continue promoting and expanding our water testing by volunteers using EPA-approved protocols, which is really important to do, to be taken seriously. Our next events for the summer include the continued statewide water quality conversation through the 48 Lakes project that Kate Robinson will be speaking about soon, along with DWD water quality advocacy meetings in Bremer and Fayette counties. So events, advocacy, and litigation work account for substantial costs, such as radio and print advertising, creating promotional materials, venue and equipment rentals, water testing supplies and equipment, food, flyers, etc. And these costs add up very quickly. On the litigation side, DWD is so fortunate to have Jim LaRue as our litigator advisor who continues to represent us pro bono on a pro bono basis. The costs involved in litigation, hiring legal expertise, expert witnesses, document production, etc., would be prohibitive for our new organization were it not for Jim's dedicated leadership and support. A few months ago, DWD was invited to join, I think this has already been mentioned, 2 other firms, Public Justice out of Washington, D.C., and Farm Stand, a group dedicated to taking on the lawsuit filed in federal district court under the Federal Clean Water Act against Agristar, located in Postville, as I'm sure you're aware. And we are the plaintiffs. DWD is the plaintiff. Jim LaRue will probably have more details about that and other litigation matters a bit later. And as I mentioned, litigation costs are very expensive, especially when you have expert witnesses coming in to testify. Your financial support makes critical litigation efforts such as the Agristar lawsuit possible. We're immensely grateful for the grants we've received from the Depot Outlet, another one from the Northeast Iowa Peace and Justice Center, along with other significant sponsorships. Looking ahead, one goal is to expand our grant seeking, and if anyone here is an experienced and willing grant proposal writer with some time on their hands, we'd love to hear from you. We are building a strong and engaged community of supporters. The DWD membership base continues to grow. We now have 268 members. And members are the most reliable revenue stream, memberships, and it's crucial for consistent operations and planning for the future. So you are so important to us. You are our ambassadors, spreading the word. We encourage each of you to invite a friend, a neighbor, or a relative, or anyone to join us, because a large and active membership base is our hope for the future of water quality. Thank you.